extend my gratitude to the Hartford Art School Endowment Inc. board members who help make these events possible. To any prospective students joining us today, I hope you experience this as just one example of the community of artists and designers that consider the Hartford Art School their home. And know that you can find your own place here in one of our 9 undergraduate programs or 3 low residency graduate programs. The Auerbach Visiting Lecture Series is almost 20 years old. It began in November 2001, and it is made possible by a gift from the Beatrice Fox Auerbach Foundation of the Hartford Art School Endowment Incorporated. The gift enables the Hartford Art School to bring visiting artists to campus each year to deliver a public lecture and spend time with students critiquing their work. I'm sure Beatrice didn't imagine that we'd be doing it all virtually, but this year, obviously, we're staying safe here at the Hartford Art School. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Associate Professor of Photography, Michael Varenwald, who will introduce our very special guest, Barbara Bosworth.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Barbara. It's with great pleasure that I get to announce, and we've worked on this for a while. We were postponed last semester due to the coronavirus epidemic. And so at long last, I'm really happy to announce that Barbara's here. Just a few words. Barbara's a photographer whose images explore both overt and subtle relationships between humans and the rest of the natural world. Her work to me actually really touches on something I think is really important right now. And once we're in the midst of an epidemic, I think a lot of people are turning to our relationship with nature, our effect on nature, and nature's effect on us. And I also think we're in a time where a lot of people are thinking deeply about how to see, how to pay attention, the pace at which you observe the world, the way you relate to nature, and the way you relate to the place you live, the planet you live on, and the landscape you're in. And I think, at least to me, right now, Barbara's work is more important than ever. And people who work in this field are very lucky to have her. A little bit about Barbara. She's from outside of Cleveland, Ohio. She studied at Bowling Green State University, where she received a BA in Fine Arts. She earned an MFA from the Rochester Institute of Technology, and she's been a professor and now a soon-to-be professor emeritus at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, which I think needs no introduction. She's published many books and had many solo exhibitions, including Heaven, Wind, Stars, and Poems at the Dats Museum in South Korea, Quiet Wonder at the Denver Art Museum, Natural Histories at the Peabody Essex Museum, and the list goes on and on and on. She's a recipient of a Guggenheim Award, a Pollock Krasner Award. She's been honored by the Society for Photographic Education, and she was shortlisted a few years ago for the Paris Photo Aperture Foundation. She's also, from my perspective, a continual presence at the New York Fine Art Book Fair, where she's always active, and to the point where the last time I went, I bought an amazing book of the Heaven, Wind, Stars, and Poems, published by Dats Press. I thought it was the most amazing thing. And as a little aside, I quickly brought it to my darkroom class where I put it out for the class. At the end of class, I pick up all the books I leave out, and that book went missing. And by the next week, when I tracked it down, this sheepish young man came up to me and said that he just merely wanted a little more time with the book. I couldn't fault him for that, so I gave him a pass. And I looked at the book over the summer in my office, and I realized it had been completely creased, folded, fingerprinted, and just completely looked at by like every student I showed the book to multiple times, which I think is a very good sign that it has an effect. on that note, I want to pass it over to Barbara. We couldn't be happier to have you today, so thank you.
Hi. Hi. Okay, am I on? Oh, okay. Hi, Michael. Thank you for that very sweet introduction. And I think I agree. And I'm going to talk a lot in my lecture about just taking time and looking at things and really observing the world, which is kind of what we're supposed to be doing as photographers. So I don't, oh, wait, I'm not talking now. Nancy's supposed to talk now. No, I'm talking now. Sorry. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm ready. Thank you for inviting me to come here. I'm really pleased to be here. Although I wish I was there in person, but you know, I think what the Zoom is doing for us, I get to jump into lectures all around the globe, right? I can hear someone speaking in Korea. I can hear someone speaking in Berlin or London, the West Coast of America. I mean, it's incredible. So I hope that stays with us. But I sure wish I could be with you all and see your work in person. So someday maybe we can work that out. But for now, thank you for inviting me. Basically, I'm going to show you my work of really the last 3 decades or so. And as Michael was saying, I am interested in the ways that humans and nature interact. That's the overarching thing that my work is about. It's the heart of what I look at. And another thing to keep in mind, my work reflects my life. Something happens in my life, it finds its way into my work. It ends up there. It is personal. Another note that I should say before we start with the images, these images are not necessarily chronological. I weave my stories sort of back and forth, and I've presented this lecture in chunks of images, but within the chunks, some of the chunks overlapped other chunks, so it's not chronological. So that gets people confused often if you're trying to follow it on a timeline. Okay, so and having said that, now Emily is going to help me share this screen. Not that one, right? Okay, good. Here we go. So I grew up in and was shaped by the forests of the Chagrin River Valley east of Cleveland. My father, a woodland romantic, and my grandfather, a painter by passion, not profession, took my siblings and me on long walks along the bridle paths that cut by our home. Some days, if we were feeling wild, we left the established paths to follow the streambed to wherever, looking for crayfish in the low water of summer, or a tanager in the canopy above, or seeking smooth ice for skating in the winter. Always our meanders were quiet and slow as I learned to love moving through these forests. So I start with this image because this is an image of the living room of the house I grew up in. It's where I spent a lot of time in front of this window. And it's where I'm convinced I learned to look at the world through a rectangle. And that's the world I looked out onto, the forest. There's a stream that ran below, and lots of animals and birds would pass by. So that was my view of the long look that I would spend a lot of time at that window. Also interesting to note the bird decal, which is a decal my parents put on the window. The theory is that it would prevent birds from flying into that large expanse of glass. But I also make note of it, how it signifies the importance of birds in ongoing through my work. So my early pictures were peopleless, just very formal images. I'm trying to figure out how to put that chaos of the visible world, right, the chaos of outdoors, into a rectangle. But I'm a sucker for waterfalls, and I'm also always been interested in geology. So this was this incredible basalt amphitheater carved out into this canyon side, and this water just seemingly falling from heaven. So it's very ethereal sense for me of this waterfall. And this is La Terrell Falls, which is the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. But I also would just like the quieter moments along the trail. This is a foxglove along the trail. where I was walking, and I could so easily become a wildflower photographer and be happy the rest of my life, just photographing flowers. A secret. This is called Cut Roses. I think, again, a lot about nature for me is, well, nature sustains us in many ways, which I'm going to talk about more through the lecture, the way it sustains us. But in this case, I think we also need to remember how its beauty sustains us, right? So this idea of cutting roses to put them into a vase and bring them indoors to have that beauty sustain us. I'm also interested in the creatures of the landscape. So I would photograph them a lot. This is called Spot Where an Elk Slept. It's in Yellowstone. And it was really just one morning I went for a walk through the meadow in Yellowstone and saw these spots where the elk had bedded down for the night. Spiderweb, I think they're pretty amazing. So of course I had to do a series of pictures of spiderwebs. They're pretty incredible. Like how does something make that? This is simply a bird nest. Again, it's connected to my interest with birds. And again, just walking along a path and seeing this bird nest, I thought how beautiful it was up in the treetop. And it was during a time when I was on the road a lot, really kind of homeless for a spell. And it made me think of home and how vulnerable that idea of home is, right? So fireflies are common. I'll talk more about them, I think, in a little bit later in the lecture, but fireflies are this incredible magic that I'm so lucky to live near a place with fireflies. You probably have them in Connecticut too, I'm guessing. This picture of birds flying and feeding, swooping on a foggy morning over the Platte River in Nebraska. They were living in the overhang of the bridge. So it gave me time. I discovered this on my walk and I had to run back to the car and get the camera and then come back and the scene was still happening. It's kind of a gift. I soon began to feel something was missing in my work. I was spending a lot of time in the woods, but I was ignoring that presence in my photographs. Didn't I matter? Didn't humans count as part of nature? I became interested in the ways that we interact with our environment, sightseers, swimmers, fishers. This image is called Mom and Dad, Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's my parents. And my dad is doing exactly what he loves to do, spend hours staring at the light, right? I don't know, what's that all about? And my mom loved the wildflowers. And since they didn't live in Colorado, they would just go out there once a year. My mom would forget from year to year what the wildflowers are. So she would walk around with the identification wildflower ID book and sort of relearn the names of the wildflowers. So it's parts of both of them that come down into my photographs. I think, sometimes we like to think we're not like our parents, but in fact, we are our parents. So this is my dad's love of just watching light move across the landscape and my mom checking out the details along the way. So in keeping with that idea of just watching the landscape and light move across it, this is an image called Artist Bluff. I had to hike up to a place called Artist Bluff. This is in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And this is the scene, the view from that. And I'm showing it here because I think I want to talk a little bit about that, that experience with the landscape, right? The idea of being a sightseer, right? A seer of sights, that I can gaze out onto the landscape, that I have that luxury in the culture that I was raised in, that I can have that, it's very luxurious relationship with landscape, right? I don't have to be down in that forest finding my food for dinner. So it's this idea of being able to sort of gaze out and that long look, which is why I know it's why I'm an 8x10 photographer, because I just enjoy that long look. Fishing at Fall Creek. This is in upstate Ithaca, New York, actually. And then I wanted to make pictures that were really just about things that I would do outdoors, even in the backyard. It didn't have to be some dramatic place. It was right there. So this is the backyard of the house I grew up in. This is my niece and nephew and their mom, my sister. And I just wanted to make a picture about what we were doing that morning, which was, the title is just Picking Wild Roses and Blackberries. And there's old blackberry bushes that we wanted for our cereal. So we went out and picked some blackberries. And there's some old roses left, I think, from my English grandfather who was a gardener and had some old roses that were still growing there. So they wanted to take those into their grandmother. So we made this picture, and my sister just lay down there because I think she's ecstatic that the kids are taken care of and are being occupied. But it's this beginning of just thinking about just the ways that just a normal interaction with nature and that enjoyment of doing that. The title of this is My Cousins Gathering Clams for Dinner. This is down in Wellfleet on the Cape. I have some extended clan down there. They're like second cousins, once removed or maybe 5 times removed. I mean, it's very, but I've known them all my life. So they're like first cousins. And there's often a lot of them would gather at one time by coincidence or by plan. And so we would do these events of wanting to all have dinner together, and we'd spend the day gathering. So very traditional roles here. The men would be out fishing and they would leave the women on shore and we'd be gathering. So these are a couple of my cousins and we're gathering the clams, and I'm, just making a picture. I was kind of useless, but had to make this photograph. But I hope I can't tell if you guys are laughing or not, but I was joking about photography being useless. I think photography is very important. So anyway, so this is also when I start thinking about the idea of sustenance, about where food comes from. And this picture was made through early 90s. It was before we started throwing around the word sustainability and thinking about local eating. But I was thinking about the idea of sustenance and about where food comes from and the fact that the earth sustains us in so many ways. So I began thinking about that with my own family, this experience of the harvesting from the sea. And this was not the same year, it was a different year we gathered, but those are some little necks from that clamming time. So I began spending time with hunters. Oh, hunters are also in the woods. I was in the woods a lot. You can't be in the woods without running into hunters, especially in the fall. So I wanted to know what they knew. Like, I knew how to navigate through a forest on a trail, right? I could hike from point A to point B, but I wanted to learn more. And hunters, they don't want the trail. They want to be away from the trails. They go where the animals go. And I wanted to know some of that. I wanted some of that knowledge. So I spent time with hunters. And I just want to be clear that I chose to spend time with hunters who hunt for food, not for trophy. I didn't want to spend my time with people who take a life to put the head on a wall. So, but hunting for food was something I was interested in thinking about and exploring. So this was a bird hunter that let me go for a walk with him. It was kind of just a walk that day, but this is another kind of bird hunting. This is swan hunting in Montana. It's legal in a few states in the country. It's, you can hunt swan, and the season for swan is right around the holidays. So it became people, instead of the goose or a turkey, this is the bird you would have on your holiday table is a swan. This is also from the swan season. This is Stacy. It was her first hunt. She's hunting the land her family owns in Wyoming, and her grandfather was teaching her how to hunt, basically. So again, I was interested in that tradition of that kind of tradition of a generation passing on to the next generation and being taken care with where your food comes from and thinking about that respect for the animal. Oh, this is just my Faulkner, nod to Faulkner and his story called The Bear. You can hunt, this is Idaho, you can hunt bear with hounds in Idaho. And this is a picture I made for that. Okay. So throughout all this, I also photographed national champion trees. A national champion tree is the largest tree of each species in the country, and there's a list kept by an organization called American Forests. Once I learned about that, I knew it was going to be something that was just going to take me. So over these last 3 decades, this picture was 1990. So 3 decades, I've been making these champion tree pictures. So this is an early one. It's my niece at the champion sycamore tree. It was in Ohio. And a bit of a story I have to tell here. She's about 7 years old here. Yeah, 7. And she was just like my little shadow. We spent a lot of time together when I'd be visiting her. And so, But I told her, but I knew I had to go make this tree picture, and it kind of don't know what you're getting into. Sometimes it's a real bushwhack to these trees, and I didn't know if I should have a 7-year-old with me. So I told her we could do whatever she wanted to do the day before. So the day comes that I'm leaving to make this picture, and she's very sad. I finally got it out of her that she was sad she wasn't coming with me. So I relented. She got permission from her mom, and the next thing I know, she had packed her lunch. She grabbed a raincoat and a book, and off we went. And she sat in the passenger side of the car and navigated. This is pre-GPS, or at least pre any that we had. She's sitting with the map on her lap, and she's telling me, okay, Aunt Barbara, in 4.2 miles, you're going to get off, and you're going to at exit 42, and you're going to turn right. It was amazing. So anyway, long story short, it was a bushwhack to this tree. It was hard to find. She was a trooper. We found the tree. We went back to the car to get the gear, came back to the tree. She immediately just sat down. It was drizzling, so she put her raincoat on, and she just sat down. And kind of with her eyes, she said, get to work. So that was my story with my niece at this as a youngster. She's pretty impressive young child then, and now she's a PhD in biophysics. Yeah, she's impressive, constantly amazes me. Okay, this is the champion slippery elm. It's in Ohio, and that's my nephew also reading. I think it's a thing they know they better do if they go with me to photograph. They better have a book to read. But more than that, it's about, for me, about the joy of reading a book in the shade of a beautiful elm tree on a hot summer day. So, so this whole series of these pictures is not so much about the biggest tree, but it's about this cross section of the American landscape. This is in Washington State. This is the champion, the largest Western red cedar. It was not cut down because it was the largest. But as you can see, I'm in the middle of a clear cut. I'm guessing the clear cut was maybe 10 years before I made this picture because there's some growth coming back. But I'm standing on a stump to make this picture that had to be at least as large as that tree was. So it makes me think about this amazing cedar forest that was here. And it's going to be 700, 800, 1,000 years before that forest would be back to what it was, if ever. So also to give you a sense of scale, that the ring around the base of this tree is a boardwalk, like sidewalk size. So it might help you get a sense of the size of these cedars that grow out west in, this is Washington State. Okay, so Connecticut trees, I put some in here for, I know not all of you are probably in Connecticut, but still your home base is Connecticut. This is the black oak tree, largest black oak in US. This is actually in Hartford. It's on the grounds of the hospital, I believe. It's the champion paper birch. And not every, when I get to a tree, sometimes it's a lot of investment in time and money to get to a tree. So when I'm there, I want to not just put all my eggs in one basket, right? And in this case, I was so struck by these branches just sort of loomed over and kind of arched, 360-degree arching around me as I stood under this tree. I know it doesn't look like a giant, magnificent tree, does it? But that's the effect I got around me. So I made this sort of 3-panel of the overhanging branches. This is another Connecticut tree, so I put it in here, but it was also to show that all these trees are not necessarily giant. This is an oak tree, but it's called a bare oak. This is a sugar maple. It's in Massachusetts, and I had to show that just because that's the state I live in now. And it's, Massachusetts does not have a good history with champions. There are hardly any champions. The state has been so deforested over the last 300 years. But this is a sugar maple. It was a champion for a while. I don't think it is anymore because probably wind came through and took down some more branches. But I wanted to make note sort of about the landscape here. If you notice how giant that tree is and the surrounding trees, it's because it was all clear cut at one point for farming and for also for a lot of sheep grazing in Massachusetts 200 years ago. So, but what they would do is leave some of these large shade trees as shade for their livestock. And you sure enough, you can see it was by an old stone wall. So as they cleared this land for farming and they built that stone wall, they left this tree, the thinking going is for shade for the livestock. Anyway, so that's the champion sugar maple in Massachusetts. And again, not all champions are large trees. This is a dwarf chinkapin oak in Kansas. Oh, I'm using this picture to sort of give a shout out to the people who find these trees, an amazing group of people who love trees and they're always searching for these trees. So look at this dirt road. Okay, imagine, or at least I imagine if I'm driving down this dirt road, I'm not looking at that tree there and thinking, oh my God, that's the largest chokecherry. I'm thinking about the fact that there's no guardrail on this. It's a narrow one-lane thing. There's no guardrail. And there's that drop off. There's no second chance on that drop off. There's no like ledge, a little bit you'd land on. No, you're down at the bottom. It's like 1,000-foot drop probably. But someone is driving down this road and thinks, oh my gosh, that's the largest chokecherry I've ever seen. Anyway, I love that stuff. So that's the champion, national champion chokecherry. Yeah, it's in Arizona. A magnificent oak. Which you can see when the leaves are off, just the beautiful structure of that classic oak. It's a bur oak, B-U-R oak tree, and that's in Missouri, farmland of Missouri. And this is the last tree picture I'm showing. It's a holly leaf buckthorn. It's in Arizona, and it's at the end of a great day of tree. One of the tree finders who I wanted to talk to just to find out where some trees were, he said, well, I'll take you. So he had mapped out a route for me. We climbed into Suburban with all my camera gear and off we go at dawn, at daybreak. And we end up, he takes me to 4 trees in one day. And this is the one we got to at the end, just as it was getting dark. So I barely eked out this one. Anyway, that's not the norm. Normally I can maybe do 1 tree in a day. But this was a day of 4, visiting 4 of these champions, only because I was with the person who knew where they were. Okay, onward. Then someone close to me died. I began photographing my loved ones with a fervor I had not before known. By securing my world in a photograph, I convinced myself it could not totally be taken away from me. So it's not that I hadn't photographed my family before the loss, but I did it differently somehow, or the urgency felt different afterwards. So I probably never would have made a picture like this of my nephew. Nothing's in focus with him. It's the softness. It sort of feels a little more unreachable, sort of more ethereal. He's standing at the side of this waterway, and his head, the way his head is turned, it's all a little bit more wistful. And then this picture of my dad, you know, with it feels like he's carrying the weight to the world, but yet there's still a softness in his smile, but his eyes are sort of lots of burden. And there's a lot of mixed things going on for me with this picture of my dad, which I might not have made during a different phase of time. At the same time, I began photographing light in the darkness, hoping to hold on to every last bit. I photographed fireflies in a jar, sunlight sparkling on leaves, a sunset, my mother dissolving into light as I learned of her Parkinson's, the moon setting, the stars, things ephemeral, things I could not hold on to physically, but in a photograph I could keep forever. So this is a picture that came from that time. It's simply just fireflies in a jar. My nephew, when he was young, helped me gather them, and sort of about that wonder and joy of that, which I remembered from my childhood. And so on one level, it's the fireflies in a jar, that wonder of that. But on another level, it's they're trapped, right? We've caught them, they're trapped, and it's suffocating. We've got a lid on this thing. So there's multiple levels of things that were happening in this point where I was just trying to hold on to whatever light I could. And also I need to say here though, don't worry, no fireflies were harmed in the making of this photograph. It was catch and release only. So I can't tell if people are laughing at me. Anyway, but it's true. We didn't harm any fireflies. Okay, this is a sunset, a simple thing like a sunset, but at this point in my life, it became like, gotta hold on to that. Look at that little slip of light, wanting to hold on to it. And I love, look at that line of trees at the horizon. Oh. Okay, this is a picture of my mom, and those are lights reflecting on her. And the story behind this is I'm just sort of out there in this darkened porch area, trying to make pictures. I don't know what, trying, you know. Sometimes you just have to give it the old try. Then my mom came and stood there, just I think checking on me or letting me know when dinner was going to be or something. And when she stood there, then those lights from the tree out in the porch you know, shown up against her. Otherwise, if she weren't there, right, the lights just blare out into the light of the room behind her. So that was the picture. So I said, Mom, just stand there. Don't worry about dinner. And so we made this picture. But it was the same year that she told us that she has Parkinson's. So it took on this different level for me of, because I know Parkinson's is a degenerative disease. So it's my mom sort of fading away, but also aren't our mothers our universe? So I'm also making pictures at this time of the night sky and the heavens. And so I'm thinking about this as my mother as the universe, or the mother, my mother fading away. But yet there she is, just in the, you know, the living room. This was their house in Florida, and she's just there. The detritus of Christmas is in the living room behind us, my nephew reading a book, and there's that bird decal that they put on this, these doors as well. Okay, every clear night of the summer, my father would go for a walk to look at the night sky. Many nights I would join him. We knew the North Star and the Big Bear, but the rest became our own. At times we'd stood still for an hour or more to watch for shooting stars. We had no agenda. It was all about amazement at a sky full of stars. So I wanted to make this image to sort of remember those nights with my dad, just out with a flashlight at night. But it led me to want to make these pictures later in life, to make pictures that sort of spoke about what I remember, that amazement I saw at a night full of stars. So I have to do a little tech talk here, so bear with me. I'll keep it as brief as possible. This is an hour exposure. So in order to get an hour exposure though, as you probably know, you can open up your shutter of your camera and let it go for an hour, and you can record stars, but you get them as streaks. You won't get the dots. And I wanted the dots, not the streaks, because I don't see streaks when I'm looking at the night sky, right? I wanted these dots. So then I thought, oh, and I also have to say, I want it to be 8x10. It wasn't going to be even 4x5 or a smaller format. It had to be my 8x10. And this is really pre-digital being accessible. So it had to be on film with my 8x10. The fastest lens I had, if I did a short exposure, like 2-second exposure, the only stars I would record would be the really bright ones, like maybe Sirius or Arcturus or some planets. I didn't want that. I wanted all of them. So I know from my astronomy friends put their telescopes onto something called a clock drive. The clock drive is something that moves with the stars. So an astronomer wants to sort of view a very tiny part of the night sky for the whole night. And they don't want to have to keep manually move this telescope every 30 seconds to stay on that star as it moves. So they put their telescopes on something called a clock drive, which moves with the star, and you can lock onto that thing and watch it all night long. So I thought, well, if you can put a telescope on this, why not an 8x10 camera? So that's the world I went into to try to figure that out. It's a lot to learn how to operate it, but it's not rocket science. So I did that. So anyway, this is how I made this hour-long exposure. It's with my 8x10 camera mounted onto this clock drive. And then you have a guide telescope next to the 8x10. So I'm looking through this guide telescope for the whole hour exposure, making sure that I keep it right on track to get these dots. Anyway, so that's how I made these pictures. And it's just simply called the Milky Way, because I also want to talk here about the fact that light pollution is real. A lot of people can't see the Milky Way anymore, have never seen the Milky Way. Big cities, you can't see stars like this. I can, maybe out where I moved out of the city, I can see some of it, but it's still fading, and light pollution is real. So if you have any, in your town, encourage people to pass the bylaws that regulate lighting so that it shines down instead of shining up, right? It's not about cutting out lights. They don't want dark streets, but you just need the light to come down. There's no reason we need to send the light up, right? Think of, oh my God, think about Vegas. Why are we sending all that light up there? It's crazy. We just need to keep it lighting down, and it's much more energy efficient, and it won't hurt the birds so much. Anyway, I could go on, but light pollution is real. And this is my sort of nod to sort of remember what a dark sky can look like. This is my nod to one of the first sort of recognizable patterns in the sky I learned was the Big Dipper. So I had to make a picture that was a nod to that. That's the Big Dipper. Oh, in New England, clouds come through. So you set up, it takes me an hour or two to set up the equipment. And then the clouds come. So sometimes I would just make an exposure anyway, hoping for the best. And this is Arcturus, a very bright star in the sky, and there's some clouds passing by. The moon, I'm showing this mostly because, well, I love this image of the moon over this, it's called Moon over Lolo Pass. But I want you to see, in fact, see how soft the trees are? So, because it's actually moving. The camera itself is moving across very slowly, but it moves. Okay. So then I also thought, I want to put a telescope onto my 8x10 because I wanted to make some pictures of the moon magnified, right? So, so it's fairly simple. I took, without the lens on the camera, I'm using the eyepiece of the telescope as the lens, right? So and if you think about looking through a telescope, you got that eyepiece projecting an image onto your eyeball. Well, instead of projecting onto my eyeball, I project it onto the camera, the film. So I can make like a 6-inch round of the moon on my 8x10 film. So this picture, yes, I know it's too dark and it's really fuzzy and blurry, but I like showing it because it's about, still this, for me, it was about exploring the wonder and the mystery, for figuring out the mystery of this again, right? I love the images coming back from the Hubble. I mean, they're amazing, right? But I'm not competing with the Hubble. I wanted to be reminded of the mystery sort of right from my own backyard. So I have a series I did of these, and a sort of a nod to Galileo also. I had seen Galileo's pencil drawings of the moon when he first turned the telescope to the skies in 1609, new technology at that time. Anyway, okay, this is where I get bogged down. So I did the same thing with the sun. This is through a telescope because I'm interested in the idea of the sunspots. I wanted to show that. Another nod to Galileo, who taught us that sunspots rotate, and he was putting together his theory of that the Earth was not the center of everything, that the sun was the center of it. And he was gathering proof by looking at this sunspots rotating. Anyway, okay, moving on, just that's the sun. Just love that orb, that glowing orb. This is without telescope, just my 8x10 on the tripod on a sunny day, just pointing up to the sun. Made a series of these and I just love the shades of pastel background sky. Eclipses are important to me too. I have them on my calendar whenever they're gonna happen, either a lunar or solar eclipse. And this was the title of this is Christmas Solar Eclipse in My Father's Hands. So it's Christmas Day and the eclipse is going to happen. So of course my family had to get involved in my picture. So we were all out there trying to make a photograph, and we did. I was making pictures, but nothing was really making my heart beat fast until the eclipse is almost over. As you can see from the sun in his hands, it's almost, the little bite out of the sun is almost gone. And I had one sheet of film left, and then my father does this. I'm like, that's the picture. So, and then my father only wears his vest on Christmas Day. It's bright red. My mom made it for him. Christmas Day, that's it. And then look at what the buttons do. They're like this little eclipsing sun on his on the vest. So you know what? Sometimes photographs are gifts. This one was just a gift that came to me. I love that one. Oh, it's also about again, fathers presenting us the universe, right? Okay, where are we? And all along, I'm interested in natural history. I'll go through these quickly because there's other ones I want to dig into deeper. But again, this is my nephew with a little magnifying glass. It's about that exploring the world through optics, whether it be my camera lens, whether it be a telescope, or whether it be just a hand loop around the backyard. And then see what the optics does, right? It flips your world upside down. Those of you who've used a large format camera know that well. That it's optics, but I like the fact that I can see my nephew upside down in this. This is a nod to my interest in botanical specimens. It's Lily of the Valley, but it's so reminiscent to me of the beautiful botanical drawings of 1700s. They're lavishly painted, lavishly colored, and also herbariums in that botanical study kind of way. This was an ornithologist I met along the way, doing some work with birds that I was doing, and her research was vireos, and there's 4 kinds of vireos in New England. So she had hand painted each one of these decoys the color to represent each vireo, and she was using them in her research. This is called my father showing me the Junonia. Junonia is that sea creature in his hand, the shell of the sea creature. And it's not rare in the world, but it's rare at the beach where my parents had their house in Florida. And they were always on, or at least my mother was on a search to find a Junonia because it was kind of a big deal there. My parents we're not like official collectors at all, but we love to walk the beach. So there's always an eye kept out for these things. Well, so one time it was my brother-in-law who found this and presented it to my mom. So this was my dad just showing it to me on my first visit down after it was found. It was a big deal. But if you notice, see, if you're a real collector, you would not want this specimen because it's worn off. But in my family, it was definitely a treasure. Okay, this backstory to this, again, my interest in botanical studies, but at this time I wanted to show, images that talked about the multi-generational presence on a place, this place where I grew up. And my grandfather, my English grandfather, sort of never stopped being a gardener. He left England when he was young, but was a gardener his whole life. And he planted an acorn near the house where I grew up. But in the 50s, he planted that acorn. And by the time my parents were selling the house, it was quite a large oak tree. My grandfather wasn't around anymore, so I could make a picture of him with it. So I had my brother hold this sprig of leaves from that tree. Again, it's reminiscent of botanical studies to me. The title is important. It's my brother holding leaves from an oak tree planted by my grandfather. So somewhere around 1996, this meadow comes into my life. And it's basically, this is the area that I photographed for 20 years, down this lane. And you can see to the left, there's the clearing there is a meadow. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side of this lane is another meadow. It's basically those two fields is where I spent 20 years just photographing. Daytime, nighttime, this is the moon rising over the meadow. Again, that's the lane down the middle of the two. It's more of an overview of the meadow. This is sort of, I think, probably late fall, the dew. These are my footprints in the dew. This is early spring, and that robin is definitely letting you know it's springtime. So with an 8x10, you know, you kind of don't just like, it's hard to be missed when you're out there. So this robin, I wanted to see how close I could get without scaring the robin off, but he was so happy just singing. I could get this close, and yet, you know, with the view camera, you still have to do the dark cloth thing. You still have to focus. You still have to put the film holder in, pull the dark slide, click the shutter. And he just sat up there and sang the whole time. Love it. So that's my robin. This is the same tree, but during the winter. So the meadow is, I'm looking at, you know, through all times, day, all seasons for 20 years. Not every day, not every week, but a consistent sort of look at this place. It then eventually became a book called The Meadow, which I did collaboratively with a writer friend of mine who wrote the essays. And then we invited scientists to come look at the land with us because we wanted to know what they know. So we had like a forager come talk to us about the wild foods that we could find around the meadow. And we had a firefly expert come and tell us about that. And we had an ant scientist tell us about that. So there was a lot of layers in making this, what became the book of fireflies all over the meadow in June. In 2012, the National Park Service invited me to photograph the New England Trail with, many of you might know it. It's a 200-mile national scenic trail. It is federal designation. It's 200 miles and it starts at the Mass-New Hampshire border just south of Mount Monadnock, and it winds its way through the Connecticut River Valley and sort of down through Connecticut, and it's kind of right through Hartford, or just, I think, is it just west of Hartford maybe, Nancy? Anyway, and then it ends at the Long Island Sound in Guilford. Great trail. You can all get out there and hike the 200 miles if you want to. Anyway, so I was invited to photograph this. I immediately said yes because, look, it's got the rivers, it's got trees, it's got geology, and it has friends to go hiking with. So I said yes, and I set out to figure out what that meant to photograph a trail. So I did some research, and that led me to, oh, I didn't say here, this is Bill Finn was the first person I met, the National Park Service, Charlie Tracy, the head of the arts program for the Park Service. put me onto Bill Finn as he's a big advocate for the trail. So I met him, and he led me to Robert Herbert, who did this catalog of Ora White Hitchcock's work. Robert Herbert is a renowned art historian, which I did not know, but he's known for his work with French Impressionists. He's done exhibitions at the Louvre and at the Met, and this was, art history man. But he left that because his wife was teaching at Mount Holyoke. So he moved to Mount Holyoke, Mass, and didn't do French Impressionism anymore, but dug into this local artist, woman artist, Ora White Hitchcock. Ora was married to Edward Hitchcock, who was the president of Amherst College at the time and an early geologist. I don't think they really called them geologists then, but he was interested in that newly developing science. And that figures in her work here as we go. But this is one of her drawings, paintings of Lady Slipper. So here's this woman making these botanical studies and these landscapes. Look at this, the waterfalls, the trees, the geology, someone interacting along the edge there. Like, wow, I'm falling in love with this woman, Ora White Hitchcock. So, so that's some of the research I did, along with, I also know about, there's art history in New England, or in this part of the world. The Hudson River School was strong here, and I've known of that work as a landscape photographer. How can you not be aware of that? But this is a painting of Catterskill Falls, which is not, the trail does not go over this, but this is more west of the trail. But it's painted by Asher B. Durand in 1849, and it's called Kindred Spirits. But also it has all the elements that I'm thinking about with my own work, right? The waterfalls, the geology, the trees. This has a bird flying in it. And it also has his friends in it. So these are Thomas Cole and William Cullen Bryant, a poet and a painter. So I knew of this art history. So I set out with these two, with Ora and the Hudson River School. I set out to make some pictures. And with various friends that I would meet, would point me to different places on the trail to find. So this is Harry, who is another trail volunteer. And he took me up to this site. It's a waterfall, believe it or not. And he still won't let me forget the fact that I made the picture that didn't even show the waterfall in it. I'm above the waterfall, that's below us. But I'm loving the way the light was falling through here, the way Harry's just resting there with his walking stick, and that little reflection of the water right smack in the center there. Anyway, this is Connecticut. It's Chauncey Peak, if anybody knows where that is. This is the view you get from up there. And I love the New England landscape. It's so beautiful to my eyes. And the farm fields below, the forests and these farm fields. And also look, there's a way on the left, you can see a figure, again, having that long look, that moment to pause and look out. And it's also used for scale. This is Rattlesnake Mountain, also in Connecticut. Lovely view from up there if any of you want to take a little hike. It's not even that hard to get up there. I walked up there with my 8x10. This is my niece and nephew came with me on this hike. And this is a popular rock climbing place near the trail. And I was there on a day, there were some young rock climbers who let me make this picture with them. Okay, another view from Ora White. This is this view, as she calls it, west view from Holyoke. So she's on top of Mount Holyoke. Today the trail does go over Mount Holyoke. I don't think it was officially a trail back then. But she made this view of this geologic feature called an oxbow. That was in 1833. 3 years later, this is Thomas Cole's version of the oxbow. Very grand, very glorious. It looms large in art history, landscape painting. Oodles have been written about this. I won't go into too much about it, but you can see the dark, stormy over the wilderness and the sunlight glorious over the cultivated, civilized land. Also, it's happened politically at this time as its manifest destiny, right? Like our God-given right to clean away the wilderness. But without all that, this was shown to me when I was probably in college and interested in geology, and someone showed this to me as the oxbow, small letter O, right? Just a geologic feature. It was later I learned that it was important in art history as a capital O, the oxbow, right? This is the oxbow, and it still exists today. And this is the oxbow today, but I didn't need to stand in, it wasn't a rephotographic survey project, right? I didn't need to stand in his footsteps, but I wanted to nod to that art history and that amazing painting. So Bill Finn knew this view of it, and you can see the trail there in the right-hand side is where the trail wanders through. So you're right next to the trail, and this is a view of the Oxbow. So I decided during the course of this project, I would set out to photograph it periodically. So this is view of the Oxbow from Dry Knob, is the name of the peak I'm on. And there's a marina down there today. So there's bright lights, talk about light pollution, right? This is where they should be told they need to put lights going down. What are they blasting upward for? But it's a marina down there now. And, but anyway, so this is just at daybreak. And daybreak in the summer, I had to be at the trailhead at like 3 in the morning. And it's a 2-hour drive from my house, so yeah. And this is the view at dawn. So I have a series of 8 to 10 of these, I think, at all lights. Again, watching light move across the space. Okay, that's a view I did from the top of Mount Holyoke. So the Oxbow is just to my left. The view that Thomas Cole painted was off to my left, but I was drawn to this thunderstorm that was building in this direction over the Connecticut River Valley. So another Ora White, she was married to the geologist, or what we now call a geologist. But so they didn't have slide projectors in those days. So what you did was have people make these large hangings, right, to illustrate something that you wanted to talk about in your lecture. So Ora White did that for her husband's lectures. And this is when she drew of the strata, so the bedrock and layers of rocks, which my interest in geology, I was drawn right to this image. So I did a lot of pictures of the rock walls along this, but I'm not going to share all that stuff with you, but I'm going to show you this one picture. It's Jurassic raindrops. So this was a rainstorm that happened 150 million years ago, give or take a few years. Okay, Jurassic raindrops. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how this works, but somehow magically those raindrops were recorded in the mud of that time along the lake shore. And then, 150 million years later, fledgling geologists are cutting this up and bringing it into their collection, which then became the museum. It's now housed in the Benesky Natural History Museum, which is part of Amherst College. And then I get to photograph it. To me, it's sort of very photographic, right? Because that's what we do in photography. We freeze a moment of time to hold on to it, right? Then we have it, it's there, it's ours, right? So this rainstorm was sort of frozen in this moment. And I find that to be quite beautiful and poetic. So okay, onward. What's my time? 3:30, oh gosh. Okay, we're doing okay. So, okay, this begins a part about birds. The first image that entranced me as a child was a print from the 1920s that hung on my bedroom wall as it had on my father's childhood wall before me. It was of a young girl sitting turned backwards on a bench in the woods, looking up into the birch tree next to her, looking up at a robin. She was so close, she could have reached out and touched it. This is not the exact one in my studio, although the print from my childhood is in my studio with me. But this is on eBay. It turns out it was a very popular print. There's lots of them on eBay. So I just grabbed an image so you could see what it was. I wanted to be that little girl. So, okay, so I wanted to figure out how to do, of course it had to do with the 8x10. And I didn't know how to do that because I'm not real fast with the 8x10. Though before I go further, I want to make sure you all look up the work of Jean-Luc Mylen, a French photographer who does make pictures of birds with his 8x10. Remarkable. Okay, I'm not that person, but you should all know that work too if you're interested. Jean-Luc Mylen. So this was my way of approaching
the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks. So this was my attempt. This is my way of then photographing birds with an 8x10. From my interest in birds as a young child, I knew of bird banders. And bird banders are people who are licensed by the federal government, Department of the Interior, to net these birds. And then they put a band on it around one of their legs, and the band has a unique number on it. And then they take certain measurements like they figure out the age of the bird, what sex the bird is, they measure the wingspan, and then they weigh it. And all this goes into a database, so that then if this bird is netted in South America, where it goes for the winter, then again, all that data is collected, and with that number, it's all entered in a database. And it's one way we have to sort of track populations and learn something about where these birds, about these lives. That's really still the technology that's out there. I mean, sometimes they put chips now in some larger birds, but you can't really do that for a mass of the population of birds. So it's really the technology they have. Anyway, so I knew the bird banders hold these birds, and I reasoned if I found an agreeable bunch, they would let me then photograph the bird before they released it. And that's what I did. So these were made with groups of bird banders. And this is an indigo bunting. Initially, the pictures were about the bird. The humans were just the backdrop. It was about the bird. Look at that color. Oh, and these are all made during spring migration when the colors are at their most dramatic. This is a common yellowthroat. And this is a black-billed cuckoo. Much like with the tree people, I just am so amazed by the breadth of knowledge that these banders have and what they know about birds. It's incredible. I would not know that was a black-billed cuckoo unless I was told. There's a yellow-billed cuckoo also. They can tell the difference between those two just by sound. Oh, anyway, okay, back to pictures. So it wasn't, it didn't take me long though to realize that people were just as important to me in this. It's about people and nature. So, and look at this Beth. I could not make a bad picture of her. She's so angelic in my mind. So this is Beth with the Carolina wren. And also, I've known for a number of years of these paintings. These are all sort of from like early mid 1400s, of the Madonna and Christ child holding a bird. Commonly it's a European goldfinch. I won't go into all that right now. There's lots written about the symbolism and why it was a goldfinch. But I was fascinated with these pictures, so I started a little collection of these images, and it's, yeah, a collection of internet images, not the paintings themselves, of course. But you can see again, Christ child holding a bird. And then here the Christ child, but also the saint, the woman, the female saint on the right-hand side is holding. Sorry, wrong picture. No, she's not. Sorry, the Christ child's holding. What is she? Sorry. Okay, Christ child holding the bird. Okay, so imagine my joy when this day at the banding table, this Renaissance young woman comes in and we get a goldfinch that day in the net. So this is my nod to the Madonna holding a goldfinch. This is Maggie with goldfinch, an American goldfinch, but that's okay. This is Emily with grackle, Dawn with a morning vireo. But the pictures still for me were about the place. I love the forest, and it's about people in these places, the animals in these places, in this case, the birds. So this is Beth about to release the bird, but I wanted to take a picture of her within this Edenic paradise of the New England forest. This is Paul with the mourning dove. So then the moment of release comes, and that to me was really a wonderful moment to watch the birds fly back into their life where we have no idea, we can't join them in that life, right? They just fly off to heaven as far as we can tell. So, so I wanted to photograph the moment of release as well. And this is Beth releasing a goldfinch. But at the same time that this was happening, I saw that show in the exhibition of Fra Angelico's paintings at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Sometimes I don't know how sometimes things come to me at the right time, but I saw that show and I was mesmerized by his work and just spent hours there. But my takeaway really was thinking about all the palms facing towards heaven, or the palms just reaching out or reaching for something. And that was happening the same time I was with the bird banders, and also at the same time when my mother was failing with the Parkinson's, had more of a hold on her, and the dementia was stronger in her, she would just often reach out for something. She'd reach up, just reaching. And I asked her once, Mom, what are you reaching for? What are you seeing? What's there? Without any hesitation. Like it was almost like no dementia was there at all. She just saw the birds. Like, don't you see them? So there's my mom reaching for the birds, and these banders are sending the birds back. And then there's Fra Angelico and the saints with their palms doing things. Like, look here, this palm reaching for each other, this touch, this palm sort of gesturing up, and looking here. So that was my takeaway with this. And I guess just a lot of things like that in my life at one time is why I focused on that, specifically with these paintings. Don't get me wrong, look at, I love this. Look at the botanical, look at how they rendered wildflowers. I just love that. And all these botanical stuff. And look at this. This is a detail of a bigger piece of painting by his, but look at the way they rendered the heavens. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so I continued to photograph about this release. So this is Molly after she's released a bird, and Beth releasing a bird. So this led me to some newer work that I was doing after that. I began to give it the name Behold, and did become a small book of these images called Behold. When I got the word my father was dying, I was traveling and away from home, but immediately got a flight to be with him. The book I had with me on the road, serendipitously, was a book about birds migrating. My father was already dying when I arrived at his side. I read to him all through the night about birds migrating, about birds flying. He always wondered, how do they know where they're going? How do they know how to come home? That was the big question for him. How do they know how to come home? How do they know how to find home? And he was just full of that wonder. So, and then later, as we're gathered around my father, really at the end, my mother again was reaching over him and for the birds that she saw flying over my dad. Very moving and very touching and quite remarkable. So these pictures are about that for me. So I kind of made these to honor that mystery of birds and their rising. And, but what they are in reality is just birds flying from my bird feeder to the trees nearby. My studio's on the second floor of the building, and I have the bird feeders just on the ground level right outside the window. And they fly back and forth from that to the trees. And I only would make these pictures when the ground was covered with snow, so the bird would stand out against the background. Otherwise, they sort of blend into the background of the green-brown background of the lawn. So that's what literally they are. And it was made with a digital camera by this time. This would never have happened with my 8x10. I'm thoroughly in love with my digital camera. Not giving up the 8x10, but there's certain things you can't do with the 8x10 that I'm using the digital camera for this. And I just made these pictures. And then it eventually became a book called Behold, that the publisher in South Carolina did a small run, limited, handmade kind of book. Okay, so then something a little more bright and beautiful. And I guess I feel I should say here that it's not like, I mean, I don't feel like the other pictures are so much that they're dark, but it's about another part of life, right? Like death is part of it. Loss and longing is part of our life, our existence. So I think that's needed as well. And as I said earlier, I think things that happen in my life find their way into my work. So that other part's important to me too, but don't get me wrong, I love a beautiful sunny day along a river in Maine. So this is work I got to do, artist in residence program. You should all be applying for artist residencies. I applied for one for a river, and I proposed that I just walk the river with my 8x10 camera, and they fell for it. So I got to do this for 2 months. I got to live up along this river in Maine, and I would just wander its edge and make pictures, which was just such a luxury for me. Don't get me wrong, there were some hot days and there's lots of mosquitoes there, but just loved it. So what more do I want to say? At every point where the road crossed the river, a bridge, I would make a picture at twilight into dark time. So I would stand at the bridge and photograph a long exposure off the, hovering right over the river at nighttime. So that was called, became a book, a small run book I made, actually for the artists, the residency, the river people, was the give back to them, because part of, sometimes residencies require you to give back something. They had a budget to make a book, so I made a small book. Okay, anyway, so this is the last group of pictures I'm going to show you. It's a very recent work. Well, this image is old, but it led to the work that was just done in August of 2019. So this is an image I made back in 1989. The title of this is Spot Where the Nez Perce People Crossed the Yellowstone River Fleeing the US Cavalry in 1877. So, and I made this picture, oh, I already said that, 1989, as I was traveling through Yellowstone. And I've always been interested in the history of landscape, and especially the history of the Western landscape and that very violent history and the wrongs perpetrated on the native people there. And I was well aware of that history of that. And so when I came to this spot that had this marker that said what happened here, I knew I wanted to make a photograph of that. But then that's, it didn't, nothing else happened with it, basically sat in boxes. Until I had a chance to apply for, I applied for another artist residency in Wyoming, and they also fell for it. So I got to go there for 3 weeks and make pictures of the Wyoming landscape. Again, I could have made, and I did make, you know, sort of the classic beautiful landscapes. It's a gorgeous landscape out there, right? Especially when the moon comes up, it's stunning out there. And then the beautiful mornings. Anyway, but I wanted to so I made those pictures, but I wanted to somehow talk about that history of the landscape, the blood on the landscape, that turmoil and trauma, and how do you put that into a photograph that, so separate from all that, before I left the house to drive out to Wyoming, I grab a box of 8x10 silver paper, photo paper, thinking I'm going to make some paper negatives. So I did. I loaded my film holders with this 8x10 paper, and I would go out and make pictures. So I knew that a negative would make the sun look black. I knew that, but otherwise I wasn't really sure what it would look like. But I exposed a bunch of these. Also my word to all of you, do not, you should definitely test your process and your materials before you go on some adventure. Do that beforehand. I did not do that, but I did go online, and I knew the ISO of paper was different than the ISO of film. So I at least accounted for the exposure, at least I thought I did. So then I have these batch of negatives. I come home, processing the paper in my darkroom. I soon realized that I had way overexposed them, because development, your normal, 2 to 3 minute development paper, it was sending it all black. So I knew I had to pull these at like 10 seconds. And you also would know, some of you might know, you get this very uneven development. So that's what we have here, this very uneven development. But something about that, it's very haunting to me. And with that black sun and the ghostly landscape there, and yet this sort of this haunting sky, it was what I needed to say. It somehow became what I wanted to speak about, this landscape. So at this point, Emily Sheffer is my assistant, and she has started an book entity called Dust Collective. So we work together to make this work into a book. So the name is From Where the Sun Now Stands. I don't think I have images to really show the whole book, but basically what we did was incorporate. So, okay, let me back up. Oh my God, I didn't tell you the most important part. This is a spot. So what happened is the Nez Perce people were fleeing the US cavalry in like a 1,000-mile retreat for over the course of 3 months, trying to get to Canada where they would be safe from the US cavalry. So they managed to keep ahead of the cavalry for these 1,000 miles. And remember, it's not just a band of warriors doing this, it's families and young children and women, and winter's coming on. So at some point, I guess something like 40 miles short of the border, they couldn't do it, and they had to surrender. So a very a moving line to me that I heard when I was a child, younger, doing a lot of reading about this history. Chief Joseph's quote is, when he surrendered, "From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. And that is where the title comes from, and the eloquence of this man, this leader of the Nez Perce. Anyway, there's more to it with the book. We incorporate the text of his speech. He then 2 years later went to DC to advocate for his people, for some rights for his peoples, and he's very eloquent, so he's addressing Congress, and there's a transcript of that speech that he gives, and it was published in 1879 in a journal called North American Review. So we excerpted some of that that speech, that where he speaks about what his people went through, and we included that into the book. So that's where I'm going to end it, from where the sun now stands. So thank you. That's the end. Is anybody out there?
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful.
Are you still there?
Michael has joined me, and for any of you who have questions, there is one here that I'd like to read to you.
Should I stop sharing this, Emily?
So how has teaching photography for so many years influenced your work?
Sorry, I was focused on my screen here.
Oh,
How
that's okay.
has teaching photography influenced my work?
Yes, how has teaching photography for such a long time influenced your work?
Yeah, it's all connected for me. I get inspired from my students just as much as I hope I inspire them. It certainly keeps me learning new things. I'm constantly reading new things about photography that I can pass on to them. So that keeps me engaged and keeps me thinking about photography, be outside of my own realm of interests, right? So it keeps me engaged that way. So yeah, I think it's a big part of my work. I think education is important for all of us, and the continual learning is important always for us to be doing. And I think that it always enters my work. So anything I would learn in order to share to my students, I think that came part of my work. Also, I had the pleasure of teaching some topical courses of my choice, like a landscape course seems to make sense for me. But then I also developed the last years of my teaching there a course called Lyric Art to the Sea. And it helped because I've also been photographing the sea for the last 30 years since I moved to New England. And that's actually, we're working on a book right now of my 30 years of sea pictures, but I developed this course to help me sort of explore and learn and think about imagery of the sea and ideas surrounding the sea. And so I was teaching my students about this, and they were out trying to make pictures about the sea and figuring out what that means. And so it kind of, it's back and forth learning. I think it's important. And the joys of teaching is that I can do that.
Fantastic. That question was from Nancy, and another question from Susan. Is there any significance in presenting some works as diptychs and others as triptychs?
Oh, no rhyme or reason to that. I think it's dictated by the scene that's in front of me and what I want to show in that scene. I don't think that I can put, I can't put any kind of rule on that. I could probably say with the trees, generally it was, the tree went right smack dab in the center. But for me, those pictures were also about the landscape. So I wanted to show the tree, but also its setting, which needed to have that expanse of the triptych. Because if you think about it, maybe you could think of it this way. Say, well, why don't you just go back further, move back. You don't have to do it in one negative. But then the tree becomes such a smaller part of the whole. I wanted the tree to really be front and center, but still have a sense of the space it was in. So I think that's why triptychs would happen. Yeah. I probably don't have any rules for it at all.
There was a question from John Reuter. Can you explain how you actually go about making a triptych?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a pretty, oh, look at the sunlight coming in on me. So yeah, it's very, it's easy, but it needs to be focused on, right? So again, I should say, if you want everything to match up in a horizontal way, then you have to sort of be careful on leveling. If you don't care about tippy horizons and nothing matching, then don't set any rules on yourself, right? But what I wanted was, I wanted some, like the horizon line to meet. So in order to do that, you just have to have everything level, and not just the camera level, right? But you have to, if you can imagine a tripod where the legs come together, let's just call that the neck of the tripod. So it has to be level there. So under the camera itself, right? You have to level the neck of the tripod so that that's level, that platform is level. Because if that weren't level, right? And even if you leveled your camera, but if this part wasn't level, then when you turn, everything's gonna get skewed a bit. So as long as you level this part, the camera sits on, and then if you re-level the camera and make sure it's level as you swing it, you're gonna get that horizon line matching if you want that. There should be no rules in art, but if you want that.
There's an interesting question from an anonymous attendee.
Ooh.
Your work makes such a strong case for Roland Barthes' notion of the haptic. The sensuousness of the textures of the image create a tactility that is perceived visually, but also felt. You did not mention the idea during your talk, but is this an idea you consider when making a photograph?
Oh, I probably have to say no to that. But wait, can you explain it again? Something about textures and.
So the term is haptic, and it's the
Yeah,
sensuousness of the textures of the image create a tactility that is perceived visually, but also felt.
Yeah, okay, so no, I probably don't think of it, but it's a lot why I'm an 8x10 photographer, because it's so rendered, so much detail is rendered, so much, so they're very tactile when I see an image, if I manage to get them sharp. Sometimes I have a lot of soft focus images too, which you might not, someone might not call that really textural and tactile, but it's definitely why I'm an 8x10 photographer, for that detail. And that even if I make a large print, I mean, it's wonderful in 8x10 contact, but even if I make a larger print, that detail is still there, and you can almost feel the bark of the tree, or sometimes I can just almost smell those flowers. I don't know if that helps answer his question, or his or her question.
I think it does. Yeah.
Let's see, Mary Fry asks, how do you determine when you use color and when you use black and white film?
Yeah, again, I really don't have a rule to that, except the work I was doing with hunters, for me, that had to be black and white, because I think black and white refers to history in a way that color didn't. And also there is a lot of blood often in the scene, and my work was not about that. It wasn't about the gore or the blood. I'm not trying to deny that and hide that, but it wasn't what my work was about. So I wanted the black and white to sort of speak about other things. So in that case, that was a determined, a predetermined for me, that it was black and white. Doesn't mean I didn't make color pictures of the hunters and some blood, but it's not the bulk of it. And the champion trees also needed to be black and white. Yeah, I don't know. Black and white again referred to history. I like that it references maybe Atjeh's trees. So yeah, so those also were black and white for me. Other than that, you know, it's an evolution for me in the early days. Yeah, the early days, the budgets had to be considered. And then at some point I decided not to consider budget and could buy the color film. But now I'm at a point where that's $16 for a sheet of color 8x10 film. That's just a piece of film. It's not processed. It's not proofed. It's just, so anyway, so sometimes the realities, Mary, come into play with that. So I'm more sparing with the color film I use now.
Kind of on the same lines, and I had a sort of thought about this too. Trevor McCarthy writes, what kind of challenges have you faced as beginning, developing, and professional photographer? And just to piggyback my own sort of curiosity onto that too is, you know, can you talk about the idea of labor, or why you would drive hundreds of miles to make one photograph of one tree? You know, like, all of these things. Yeah.
Well, wait, okay, so maybe I'll address that because it's fresh in my mind. I've already forgotten the first part of the question. So basically, I typically would not drive just for one picture. I would then pick up a group of images. Like it would be if I was visiting a friend in California, well then why don't I spend a few days and look for some California trees? Or I go home to my family in Ohio, then I'll photograph some Ohio trees. In Arizona, because I was teaching in Arizona for a semester in 2010. So I photographed a lot of Arizona trees then. So but so the question was challenges, right? How, what is the challenge?
Like sort of at all points in your career or your working life, yeah, what types of challenges, I guess?
Yeah, well, challenges are, I suppose, yeah, I don't know. Well, it's not easy, I suppose. Art is hard. So you're always, you have to find it in yourself to keep making the work, right? Nobody's telling me I have to make these pictures, so I kind of have to do it myself. This is also the teacher in me, right? I'm always sending this out to the students in the audience, that you have to find it within yourself, because when you leave school, nobody cares if you make pictures anymore, right? So, or make art. So there's that discipline, and that's a challenge. There's a challenge of also just having to support yourself. So for me, it was a teaching job. So there's that balance of time, right, between your duties to the school and then my drive for making pictures. There's your social challenges too, right? You want to balance life with friends as well. And so those are some challenges. I mean, yeah, it's always a struggle with money and wow, challenges of being alone on the road by myself a lot was hard because I didn't want to put my friends through some of these road trips, right? So it was a lot on the road by myself. I don't know how much this is going to embarrass Emily here, but I'm so lucky now that Emily is my assistant and she has the freedom of being able to go with me. So now I have companions on the road, and I'd say it's much better that way, having someone go with you. But in the past, you couldn't put a friend through this. Family, maybe you can abuse family. They would come and let me make pictures, but mostly friends they wouldn't put up with it. So those are challenges. There are many more. And a lot of times, I guess you can't think of them as challenges. You just sort of do your work, you just make it happen. You do what you have to make it happen. Yeah. Being on the road as a woman probably was hard alone. That was pretty hard, but you just learn ways to do that.
Let's see if you see any others. Michael, jump in. Let's see. Power Booth asks, do you have a sense of how many images you will shoot versus how many images you will accept as you're working, or I guess that you will edit into a finished body of work?
Yeah. Oh, I see. So how many I make and how many then
Versus
get looked at?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I make a lot of pictures and not very many make it into the light of day. Well, everything gets processed and everything gets printed. I see the work, but not everything will make it into a book or an exhibition, or I don't know. So the ratio, I don't know, 10%? I don't know. Is that kind of what they're looking for, you think, in the question? It's not a lot, and I photograph a lot. So, and I don't have a gallery or any of that kind of outlet. So it comes in books. So it's whatever people see in books. And I've been doing this what is this now? Gosh, almost 40 years I've been at this. So there's a lot of pictures. It's a minuscule part that will get published.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It takes a lot, right?
Oh my gosh, and you have to want to do it. The thing for me is nobody's making me do this. I do it. Yeah. I can't not do it, I guess is the thing. And maybe that's some crazy obsession. I don't know, but it's.
I think that's similar for a lot of us, I love that. I love that. That's the way you describe it, because it's the same for me. And I think the same for many, many people.
I think you're right. It has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. If you want to keep getting to the next thing, what is it that's next?
Right.
You really have to really want to get there.
Yeah, and you don't even know what that is. You just keep working and then you find it. Like I had no idea I was going to make those paper negative images to speak about that landscape out there. But I was curious and I tried this thing with paper negatives and it worked. It made it. Somehow you find, I know.
If you keep working those things,
that's right.
You find them, they find you.
That's right. Was it some golfer? Was it Arnold Palmer who somebody said that was a really lucky shot? And he said, well, it's funny, I find the more I work, the luckier I get. I think it was probably Arnold Palmer, somebody. Yeah.
Oh, I thought I saw one other, but that might sort of be yeah, I guess it sort of piggybacks on the question we just took, but from Robert Stone, who I think you might have met at some point, says, what is your process for whittling down the overwhelming amount of work you have into something concise? I imagine
Yeah.
a finished book.
Yeah, so, well, the editing process, yeah, is another one of, it's just another step of that, making the image, right? So I don't know, for me, I think does the picture still excite me? Does it make my heart beat fast? Is there something in there that is just such a surprise and a wonder to me, and that it's still that way after looking at it for a while? So I think at the bottom for me, it's still about that. And then I also have to think that does it, especially if you're editing for a book, right? Does it fit does it fit the story you're trying to tell? Or, yeah. So often I love a picture, but it might not fit that story I'm telling. So it has to get edited out. And this is, I think, is the hardest thing for the students that I teach sometimes to understand. No, it's not that that's not a good picture. It's just how does it fit within the whole sequence here that you have. So I think that's a hard thing to do, but and also, you know, it's an important thing is to run it by other people, you know, run it by colleagues, run it by friends, and let them also respond to the pictures and see what they say. And I think that helps edit as well.
Yeah. Michael, did you want to ask anything else or see any one last question? We could maybe take one last question before we wrap it up.
I don't know. I think maybe we're good. I feel like you've kind of touched upon the essence of most of these questions. Yeah.
Great. Right. Well, Barbara.
Well, I'm going to still have time with some of the seniors, I guess, so we can talk more in depth on some of these.
You're going to move on to another session with them. But on behalf of the University of Hartford, the Hartford Art School, the Dean, the Photography Department, Professor Michael Varenwald, myself, thank you so much. That was really quite wonderful.
Thank you.
I hope we get to see each other again at some
point. Oh my
point.
gosh, that would be great. Yes.
In person. Yep. When it happens, it's coming. It will happen.
I know. I guess there's good news out there today. The vaccine. So
things happen. So thank you again so much. Thanks everybody for joining us, and look out for our next Auerbach lectures coming up in the spring. Thanks everyone.
Thank you everybody. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Barbara.
Oh, Nancy. Bye, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy.
So I think we're going to switch over to Danielle's. I think we have a little